This story begins in the quiet corners of Riverdale, a town forgotten by time but held together by memories, family, and broken promises. It is a story about a woman who gave everything for love, only to discover the truth in silence. What she lost in family, she found in courage. And through one act of strength, she changed not only her future, but the legacy of her name. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to like this video and comment what city you are listening from. For those who clicked subscribe, may God bless you with health, heal every illness in your body, and bring wealth and joy into your life. Share this channel with others. And remember, don't just watch the screen. The visuals are only decoration. This story is meant to be heard. Let your imagination do the rest. The clock in Margaret Ellis's living room ticked slowly, almost as if it too had grown tired of the silence. Each second echoed louder than the last inside her small Riverdale home, a house once filled with laughter, arguments, music, and the smell of Henry's favorite coffee. Now the rooms echoed only her footsteps, and the air felt heavier with each passing day. She was 78, widow, no longer needed. At least that was how it felt most mornings. Henry had been gone for 4 years. He fought with all he had, but in the end, death came quietly, like the closing of a book with no final chapter. Since then, Margaret had grown used to solitude. What she never got used to was the way her family had begun to treat her, as if she were a relic, something to dust off only when necessary. Her son Brandon rarely called unless there was a bill to pay or advice he didn't want to take. His wife Samantha was always polite, but hollow, as if every word she spoke came from a script. Visits were short, full of smiles that never reached the eyes. It wasn't hatred, it was worse. Indifference. Only Ethan, her 12-year-old grandson, gave her reason to smile. He'd come running into her house with wild hair and louder stories, pulling her back to life with every hug. With Ethan, she could pretend the world was still warm. Margaret sat by the window that morning, watching the leaves stir outside like they were dancing to a rhythm only they could hear. She stirred her tea, careful not to spill. Small actions mattered now. Control over little things gave her a strange comfort. She opened the drawer beside her chair and took out a small photo album. Inside were faded pictures. Henry in his army uniform, Brandon as a toddler with cake on his face, their old dog Cooper chasing squirrels in the yard. She smiled, then closed the album. It was enough for today. Her phone buzzed. A message from Brandon. "Hi Mom. We're planning a little dinner for my birthday next week. Samantha and I would love to have you there. Let me check the time and get back to you." Margaret's heart lifted, but cautiously. She texted back something cheerful and simple, not wanting to sound too eager. It had been a while since she'd been invited to anything. She looked out the window again, smiling this time, not from memory but from hope. In the quiet, that single message felt like the beginning of something. Or perhaps the end of something else. The days leading up to Brandon's birthday passed with an air of quiet anticipation. Margaret found herself humming while folding laundry, wiping down counters with extra care, and even baking lemon bars the way Henry liked them. Ethan had once said they were his favorite too. For the first time in months, she was excited. A dinner invitation may seem small to some, but for Margaret, it was something precious. A signal that maybe, just maybe, her presence still mattered. She even took out her navy blue dress from the closet, the one Henry always said made her look ready to win a courtroom. She laid it on the bed like a promise. But on the morning of the dinner, her phone buzzed again. "Hey Mom. So sorry, but Samantha isn't feeling well. We're going to cancel the dinner. Maybe we can do something later next week." Margaret stood frozen, staring at the screen. Her tea sat untouched on the kitchen table. The house, already quiet, now felt colder. Her fingers hovered above the phone. She typed slowly. "Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Hope she feels better soon. Let me know when you want to reschedule." She read it 3 times before pressing send. Then she set the phone down and looked over at the lemon bars on the counter, still cooling on a wire rack. She wrapped them in foil and placed them in the freezer. Maybe she could give them to the neighbors later. That evening she sat by the window again, but not with hope. This time her thoughts turned inward. She tried to reason with herself. Maybe Samantha really was sick. Maybe it wasn't personal. Maybe Brandon was overwhelmed. She had learned in her later years to find peace in maybes. But they always left her empty. The following day she went about her routines with slow, careful steps. She watered the plants, dusted Henry's old books and made soup she didn't feel like eating. But it was Ethan's visit that brought light into her dim kitchen. "Grandma," he said as he walked in, arms full of colored pencils and notebooks. "We had cake at the restaurant last night, but the frosting was weird. Too lemony." Margaret froze. She looked up from her soup. "At the restaurant?" "Yeah," Ethan said, pulling out a drawing to show her. "For Dad's birthday dinner. It was at Riverbend. I got to sit by the window." He was talking so freely without realizing what he'd just said. Her eyes remained on him, but her heart had begun to sink. Riverbend. The same place where Henry had taken her every anniversary. The same place where, just a few nights ago, she thought she'd be. She smiled gently and nodded, hiding the tremor in her hand. "Sounds like a lovely evening, sweetheart." Ethan continued to chatter about his drawing, his schoolwork, his favorite dessert. Margaret listened, every word washing over her like soft rain on a cracked window. Her grandson was joy wrapped in innocence. He didn't know what he had just revealed. She didn't ask more questions. Not yet. When Ethan left that afternoon, Margaret remained seated. She didn't move. Not for minutes. Not even when the shadows grew longer and the room began to darken. She had not been forgotten. She had been left out. The next morning, Margaret woke with a weight pressing on her chest, like silence had grown teeth and sunk them into her thoughts. The memory of Ethan's innocent words haunted her. Cake at Riverbend, sitting by the window, a birthday that was never cancelled. She moved through her routine in slow motion. The house creaked the way it always did, but this time it felt like it was sighing with her. She brewed her tea but didn't drink it. She looked at the navy blue dress still laid across the bed, untouched, as if it too had been stood up. By noon she couldn't sit still any longer. She picked up the phone and dialed a number she hadn't used in a while. It rang only once. "Margaret Ellis, is that you?" Gloria May's voice was full of surprise and warmth. "I was just talking about you last week. Thought you might have vanished." Margaret smiled faintly. "I'm still here, though I'm starting to wonder if anyone's noticed." "Oh honey, that doesn't sound like your usual spark. What's going on?" There was a pause. Margaret stared at a photo of Henry on the bookshelf, then lowered her voice. "Brandon invited me to dinner for his birthday. Said they'd let me know the time. Then he texted, said Samantha was sick. That they were canceling. But yesterday Ethan told me they still went. To Riverbend." Silence met her words. Then a quiet exhale. "Oh Margaret," Gloria said gently. "I didn't realize you weren't there. I was at Riverbend that night. With some of the gals from the book club. We saw them. Brandon, Samantha, Ethan. They were sitting at the big table by the fireplace." The words stung more than Margaret expected. Hearing confirmation was like ice water trickling down her spine. "I see," Margaret whispered. "So it wasn't just confusion." "No, sweetheart. I'm afraid not. They looked cheerful, toasting and laughing. No sign of sickness." Margaret thanked her, said a few polite things and hung up. She stood in the middle of her living room for a long time. The ticking clock on the wall suddenly sounded louder, almost angry. It marked every second since the truth settled into her bones. It wasn't an oversight. It was a choice. Her son, her own flesh and blood, had chosen to celebrate without her. Not even a phone call afterward. Not even a lie well told. She didn't cry. Not yet. Margaret Ellis had long ago learned how to hold herself together in a storm. But inside her, something cracked. Not just sadness, but something deeper. A reckoning. That night, she sat with her thoughts instead of the television. She didn't need distraction. She needed resolve. Brandon didn't just forget her. He removed her. And she wasn't going to stay quiet. The next morning, she opened the closet, took out her navy blue dress, and ran her hand over the fabric. Then she opened the drawer where Henry's old pen sat beside an unused notepad. She began to write. Plans. Numbers. Names. Something had shifted inside her. The kind of shift that couldn't be undone. Not by a phone call. Not by an apology. She folded the dress neatly and laid it in her suitcase. Margaret Ellis was going out. It was a Saturday evening when Margaret stepped out of her front door, the cool air brushing against her cheeks like a whisper of warning. The sun was setting behind the trees, casting gold across the rooftops of Riverdale. Her suitcase rested by the door, but she wasn't going on a trip. Not yet. That would come later. Tonight she had a destination. She wore the navy blue dress, pressed and spotless, and a pair of pearl earrings Henry had given her on their 30th anniversary. Her shoes were simple, low-heeled, and comfortable. She didn't want to make a scene. She wanted to be remembered. The drive to Riverbend was short, but it felt longer. Every turn of the wheel brought her closer to a confrontation she never imagined having with her own children. Her hands trembled slightly as she parked across the street. She took a deep breath, then opened the car door. Riverbend stood tall with its brick walls and ivy-covered windows. Warm light spilled out through the glass, glowing against the night. People inside were laughing, drinking wine, living in their small Saturday joys. As she approached the entrance, the familiar chime of the doorbell echoed above her. The scent of roasted herbs, garlic, and warm bread greeted her like an old friend. For a second it felt like she had stepped back in time. Back to when Henry was alive, when birthdays were shared, and when family meant something unshakable. Behind the hostess podium stood a man with silver hair and a linen vest. He looked up, blinked, and then smiled with startled delight. "Margaret Ellis," he said. "I'll be damned. Is it really you?" She smiled softly. "Hello, Thomas." Thomas Rayner, owner of Riverbend, reached out and took her hand warmly. "It's been 10 years since I last saw you in here?" "Not since Henry's, well, you know." "I know," she said, her voice gentle but firm. He stepped aside. "Can I get you a table?" "I'm actually here to find someone," she said. "My son, Brandon Ellis." Thomas's expression didn't shift, but his eyes flickered with recognition. "Ah," he said slowly. "They're here tonight. In the back room. Private party." She nodded. "Could you take me there?" He hesitated. "Margaret, I don't want to step into anything uncomfortable." She looked him in the eye. "I appreciate that. But I'm ready." He gave her a quiet look of respect, then motioned her to follow. They walked past candlelit tables and whispered conversations, into a hallway lined with old framed photographs of the town's history. At the end was a heavy wooden door, slightly ajar. Behind it, the sound of clinking glasses and laughter echoed like a song out of tune. Thomas stopped before the door. "If you need anything," he said softly, "you know where to find me." She nodded and placed her hand on the door. Took one breath, then pushed it open. The room hushed almost instantly. Brandon looked up from his seat at the head of the table, a slice of cake halfway to his mouth. Samantha froze beside him. Ethan, sitting between them, stared at his grandmother, eyes wide, uncertain. Margaret stepped into the room. Her presence filled the space without raising her voice. No one spoke. Even the server stopped mid-step. She looked directly at her son. "Brandon," she said evenly. "I hope I'm not interrupting. I heard the dinner wasn't cancelled after all." The room was silent except for the soft hum of music from the hallway. Samantha opened her mouth, then closed it. Brandon stood slowly, eyes darting toward the door, as if hoping someone would save him from the moment he had created. "Mom, She raised her hand just enough. "Please," she said. "Let me finish first." She took another step into the room. The pearls around her neck glinted under the warm lights. "I won't take much of your time. I just want to leave a few things behind. Nothing heavy. Just the truth." And with that, she reached into her handbag and pulled out a folded envelope. "Thomas," she said over her shoulder, not turning, "would you mind staying a moment?" Outside the room, a quiet voice replied, "Of course." Margaret stepped forward, the envelope in hand. There was more to say, and soon she would say it. But for now she stood tall, alone but unbroken. The envelope in Margaret's hand was thin, but its weight was undeniable. She placed it gently on the table in front of Brandon, right beside the untouched birthday card from Samantha and the melting remains of a candle stuck in lemon cake frosting. Brandon stared at it like it was a trap. Margaret didn't sit. "I spent 38 years in the house you grew up in," she began, her voice calm, unshaken. "That house held every scraped knee, every bedtime story, every argument, every Christmas morning. It held your father's laughter and my tears. It held memories you've chosen to forget." The room remained still. Samantha lowered her eyes. Ethan looked between them, confused, the tension finally touching even his young heart. Margaret continued. "When Henry passed, I stayed because I thought that's what you all needed. Familiar ground. A safe place to return to. But you stopped returning. You started showing up only when it was convenient. or when something needed fixing or funding. Brandon shifted. "Mom, this isn't the place." "No," Margaret interrupted, not raising her voice. "This is exactly the place. You excluded me from your birthday. You lied to me. And for what? To avoid an awkward conversation? To save a seat." Thomas, standing silently by the door, looked down respectfully. Margaret turned toward Ethan. Her voice softened just for him. "Ethan," she said gently, "you didn't do anything wrong. You told the truth without knowing it. And I'm grateful for that. Never stop telling the truth." The boy nodded slowly, his eyes starting to glisten. Then Margaret turned back to Brandon and Samantha. "I sold the house," she said. "Last month." Gasps escaped from a few of the guests seated further down the table. Colleagues, friends of Brandon, people who didn't know the family story but could feel the weight of the moment. "I didn't tell you," Margaret went on, "because I wanted to do something with that money. Something your father would have been proud of." She reached into her bag again and pulled out a second envelope, thicker, sealed in gold. "This is confirmation of a donation. $485,000 to the Riverdale Public Library. It will be used to build a new children's wing. A place for young readers. A place for hope." She paused, then looked straight at Brandon. "And it will be named after your father. The Henry Ellis Children's Wing." No applause. No reaction. Only stunned silence. "I didn't do this out of spite," Margaret added. "I did it because I've spent enough of my life giving to people who didn't see me, who only saw what I could offer them." Brandon finally found his voice. "You sold the house without telling me, without even asking." "I don't need your permission," she replied, the edge in her voice sharper now. "I am not a guest in your life, Brandon. I'm your mother. But you made it clear that doesn't matter anymore." Samantha placed a hand on Brandon's arm, but he pulled away. Margaret stepped back, steady and slow. "I came here tonight not to shame you but to free myself. I've been waiting years for you to see me again. Not as a burden, not as a wallet, not as a leftover from another time, but as your mother. A person. A woman with a heart you once held." She turned toward the door. "And now I'm done waiting." Without another word, she walked out of the room. Thomas held the door for her, and they said nothing as she passed. The room behind her stayed frozen in its silence, broken only by the quiet sob of a child who understood more than he should. Outside, the night had deepened. The stars above Riverdale were faint, but they were still there, constant, distant, and enduring. Just like her. The air outside Riverbend tasted of cool earth and coming rain. Margaret stood beneath the amber glow of the street lamp, her hands tucked neatly around the straps of her bag. Her chest rose and fell with slow, deliberate breaths. No shaking. No hesitation. The confrontation was done, but her story was far from over. Thomas Rayner stepped outside a few moments later, catching up to her with his usual quiet steps. "You all right?" he asked, his voice low. "I'm better than I've been in years," Margaret replied. They stood there for a moment, the quiet hum of distant traffic filling the space between them. "You handled that with more grace than I think I could have managed," he said, offering her a half smile. She looked over at him, the corners of her lips turning up just a little. "Grace isn't weakness, Thomas. Sometimes it's the only way we stay human." He offered to walk her to the car. She accepted. As they reached it, she placed her hand on the door handle but didn't open it right away. Instead, she turned to face him. "Thomas," she said, "I need a witness. Someone outside my family. I've made some decisions, and I want them honored." His eyebrows lifted. "You have my attention." Margaret opened her bag and took out a third envelope. This one was thinner than the donation papers but more personal. It was the updated version of her will. "Everything I have left, what's in my accounts, what's in my jewelry box, the furniture, the car, it's all going to Ethan." Thomas took the envelope gently, almost reverently. She went on. "He's the only one who came without asking for anything, who never made me feel like a problem. That's the kind of love that deserves to be honored." He nodded slowly. "Does Brandon know?" "He will," Margaret said. "Eventually." She looked up at the dark sky, stars now peeking through the thinning clouds. "When Henry died, I thought the world had taken the best part of me. I thought the rest of life would be just waiting. Waiting for time to run out. Waiting for people to remember me." She paused. "But tonight I stopped waiting. Thomas placed a hand on her shoulder, warm and firm. You did more than that. You rewrote your ending. She smiled again, this time with more certainty. I suppose I did. Margaret opened the car door, but before she stepped in, she turned back once more. Do you still live above the restaurant? She asked. Still do, he said. She nodded. Maybe I'll stop by sometime. If you're not too busy. Thomas grinned. I'll make time. She gave him a small wave, then slid into the driver's seat. The engine rumbled to life, steady and familiar. As she pulled away from the curb, Margaret didn't look back at Riverbend. She didn't need to. She had spoken her truth. Given what needed to be given. Taken nothing. The road ahead was hers now. No longer just a mother, no longer just a widow. But a woman who had finally chosen herself. 3 months passed like pages turning in a quiet book. Margaret's new apartment was modest, but the view from her window made her feel taller somehow. She watched the sun rise over Riverdale each morning, golden light spilling over rooftops like a second chance. The building was quiet, the neighbors kind, and the space just enough. Her old house had held decades of memories, but here she felt free. There were no more surprise visits from children who needed money. No heavy silences waiting for phone calls that never came. Just her tea and her time. Each Tuesday and Thursday she volunteered at the Riverdale Public Library. Not behind a desk or in the back room, but right there in the children's section, where bright-eyed kids flipped through picture books and whispered secrets into pages. The library was mid-renovation. Construction on the new Henry Ellis Children's Wing had begun, and the blueprints hung proudly near the entrance. People stopped to read them. Some left donations. Others left stories about how Henry used to fix their cars or help with their taxes. He had been that kind of man. Margaret listened, smiled. Sometimes she cried, but never from regret. Her days grew full again, not with obligation but with choice. She baked for the library staff. She read to children during story hour. She laughed again, really laughed, on Thursday mornings when Thomas Rayner would show up with 2 cups of coffee and say, "Got 15 minutes for an old man with bad knees and better stories?" They walked the library halls together, slow and steady. Sometimes he talked, sometimes she did, and sometimes neither of them said a word. But the silence between them was not empty. It was restful. One Thursday, as they sat outside on a bench near the library garden, Thomas handed her a folded paper. "What's this?" Margaret asked. He smiled. "A flyer for the opening ceremony." They finished ahead of schedule. She unfolded it carefully. There in bold letters were the words, "The Henry Ellis Children's Wing. Grand opening, this Saturday at 10 a.m. Her breath caught. It was real now. Not just an idea or a signature on a page. A real place. A legacy. "I thought you might like to say something," Thomas added. "They asked me, but I told them you should be the one." Margaret stared at the flyer, the paper trembling slightly in her hands. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "You'll know when it's time," he said. She looked at him, the corners of her eyes lined with both age and courage. "I'm not used to being the center of attention," she murmured. Thomas chuckled. "You've always been the heart of the story, Margaret. You just didn't know it." That night, she sat by her window long after the lights of the town dimmed. In her lap was a notebook, blank except for the name written at the top. For Henry. She began to write. Not a speech, not a letter. Just words she needed to say. Outside, the stars kept their quiet watch. Anne Margaret Ellis, once forgotten, now found herself standing in the center of her own life. No longer waiting to be remembered, but finally living. The morning of the ceremony arrived with a soft breeze and clear skies, as if the town itself had paused to watch. The library bustled with quiet excitement. Banners hung above the entrance, and rows of folding chairs were arranged beneath a white canopy outside the new children's wing. On each seat, a small bookmark printed with Henry Ellis's name fluttered in the wind. Margaret arrived early. She wore a simple cream-colored blouse and a gray skirt. Nothing grand. Just enough to feel presentable, to feel seen. She held a small piece of paper in her hand, folded in thirds, though the words inside had long been memorized. Thomas met her at the front steps with a gentle smile. "You ready?" She looked at the crowd gathering, librarians, children, town officials, neighbors, and then toward the last row where Brandon, Samantha, and Ethan had just arrived. Ethan waved at her eagerly. His parents did not. Margaret nodded. I'm ready. The director of the library stepped up to the microphone and welcomed everyone. There were kind words about community, about service, about how the new wing would open a world of learning to the next generation. Then her name was called. Margaret stepped forward slowly. The crowd grew still. She looked at the faces in front of her. Some she recognized. Most she didn't. But all of them were here for something larger than her pain. Something Henry would have believed in. She unfolded the paper, glanced at it once, and then lowered it. I was married to Henry Ellis for 42 years, she began. He was a mechanic, a storyteller, and a man who could never remember where he put his reading glasses. Soft laughter rippled through the audience. He believed in hard work, in small kindnesses, in holding the door open even if your hands were full. And more than anything, he believed that children deserved to be heard. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. When I lost him, I lost the anchor of my life. And for a long time after, I tried to fill that space with expectations, hoping others would remember me, invite me, need me. But eventually I realized, legacy isn't built from who shows up at your table. It's built from what you leave behind when you're gone. She glanced at Ethan, whose eyes never left her. This wing is not about loss, she said. It's about giving. About planting something that will grow even after I'm no longer here. It is for the children who dream, who wonder, who need a quiet place to feel safe. It's for the future. She stepped back, her heart beating steady, and returned to her seat. The audience applauded, not thunderously but sincerely, a sound that meant something. After the ribbon was cut and the doors opened, children rushed inside, exploring shelves, nooks and corners filled with stories waiting to be discovered. Margaret wandered through the space slowly. She touched the spine of a book with a smile. The room smelled of new wood and fresh ink, and the light through the windows cast warm patches on the floor. She felt a presence beside her. "Grandma," Ethan said quietly, "this is the coolest place I've ever seen." She knelt beside him, smoothing his hair with her fingers. "It's yours now." He looked at her. "You mean that?" She nodded. "All of it." From across the room, Brandon watched, his expression unreadable. Samantha beside him said nothing. But Margaret didn't look their way again. She had already said goodbye to what was missing. What remained was hers to build. Later that day, as the crowd thinned and volunteers cleaned up folding chairs, Margaret stood once more beneath the sky, watching the sun begin its descent. Thomas walked beside her, hands in his pockets. "It's beautiful," he said. "It is," she replied. She didn't mean the building. She meant the feeling. The peace of knowing she had given something real. Something lasting. Something hers.